It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians, bonus edition. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we have as our special guest, cartoonist, artist, and general maker of things, Kiana, aka Junk World USA from Tumblr.
Yes, it's me from Tumblr. Hello.
It's Kiana from Tumblr, ladies and gentlemen.
Kiana from Tumblr. She
Yes.
is our special guest for this episode, where we are talking about...
We were talking about Sandman, which was, I would say, a formative text for me when I was a teenager.
And me. My friends and I did an entire play, wrote and performed an entire play inspired by The Kindly Ones.
It's astounding that I didn't know that.
That's where I got the costume, the dress, the nightgown, purple dress thing that I used to wear. That was my costume in that play. That's where I got it from.
I think that it's probably very wise of you not to have told me that.
I mean, yes. It was inspired by a general interest in Triple Goddess mythology, but that was sparked partly because Jen and I were reading Sandman, and, we were both reading Damien's copy of The Kindly Ones.
Right, and when you told me about this, you leaned very heavily on the Triple Goddess part and did not so much mention the Neil Gaiman.
I definitely told you the Neil Gaiman part.
Anyway, this episode is going to be mostly this kind of thing, I think, but we'll try to actually talk about the text.
This is partly why we have Kiana, who, is an expert on comics. Compared to me and Isaac, you're an expert. Look, you're a professional maker of things, including comics, and your comics are very good. So,
thank you. I appreciate that. I do think that there is a gulf between indie cartoonist people and the kind of people who have encyclopedic knowledge of 90s comics, your Morrison fans and your Moore fans, which I am also. I enjoy Morrison and Moore.
And it makes sense to talk about Morrison, Gaiman, and Moore in the same
I think
sentence
so.
Because
definitely.
For some reason in England in the 80s and 90s,
what were they putting in the water over there?
A bunch of comics writers decided that they were wizards.
Yes.
The three most influential comics writers in England, in fact, all decided that they were wizards. Actual wizards.
Gaiman's probably the only one who, at least on in his public life, does not explicitly
dress
believe
like
in
a wizard.
magic.
And yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But
Moore and Morrison are both over here crafting sigils and worshipping snake gods.
yes, but Gaiman has left this mostly in this comic, and in fact, this comic is partially about Gaiman backing away from the old magic deal, I would say.
Yeah.
But it's about a whole bunch of other things as well. So let's steer this rickety boat back toward the format, if at all possible. Who wants to summarize the plot of Sandman?
Well, I believe that the creator itself once summarized the plot as the King of Dreams is faced with the choice to change or die, and he makes his decision.
Yeah, that works. The other reason that we were talking about this now is that the Sandman is being made into a TV show, which I think is a terrible idea.
But see, yes, it is true that they're making it into a TV show, but I thought we were talking about this because you suddenly had the realization, which I'm really looking forward to hearing you justify, that one could consider Sandman to be a Wizards versus Lesbians text.
Oh, yeah. No, so are there wizards in Sandman?
I mean, yes, obviously.
Very much so.
Are there lesbians in Sandman?
I mean, yes, but they're not really central. There's multiple lesbians, but they're not central to the plot.
So it's Wizards versus Lesbians adjacent. In much the same way.
I mean, I assumed that was why it was a bonus episode.
Yeah.
Yes.
And not the mainline Wizla's canon.
Yep, you got it.
But Dream is incredibly wizardy, though. And
right, no, this is definitely a sort of wizards versus feminine rage from the point of view of the wizard.
Oh, it's wizards versus women. Across the board.
100%.
The comic and Dream are both misogynists.
Yes.
And I would argue that the comic is about putting to rest and mourning the male-dominated science fiction dynasty of the last essentially 50 years before this point was written, because, well, for reasons which I'll get into. And that is significant given, what we talk about these days. And so I think it's an important precursor.
No, that's fair. Anyway, the wizard and the lesbians don't fight too much, but
no, it's mostly straight women who hate Dream because he's just too damn attractive.
And also an asshole.
Yeah. No, obviously. He's such a twerp, and he does become less of a twerp as the comic goes on, but Original Recipe Dream is the twerpiest twerp who ever twerped.
I having just finished rereading the Kindly Ones, he's still pretty much a twerp to his dying moment.
I mean, there's a gradient, but regardless. So why should you read The Sandman?
Well, so here's the thing, and this is another reason, Kiana, that you'll provide a really valuable perspective here, because I can tell you why you should read the comic if you're a wannabe edgy teen in the 90s. Right. But that's not possible anymore. And I don't know if I can talk about the comic without that. So why should a modern day person who might be interested in this sort of thing read the comic?
I do think that it maybe precipitated maybe a change in mainstream comics, or at least was popular enough. I reread this after rereading The Invisibles, and a couple other Morrison joints, and I was just shocked at how readable it was in comparison, in a way that I jokingly said that it was a comic for girls, because coming from The Invisibles, which is nonstop James Bond and Matrix and 90s gory edgelord shit, which Sandman has some in the beginning for sure.
Oh yeah.
But having this be an actual story where characters kind of walk around and talk, and
in lieu of having fights.
Right. In lieu that the focus of the story is the characters and the places, and I mean the art is gorgeous. It kind of it obviously runs the gambit. But a lot of it is just really beautiful Art Nouveau stuff, and I don't know what it was at the time, but I imagine I could definitely find an audience of non-male readers.
I mean,
Dream
is a Borbo of vast proportions, surely.
Right.
Oh, yes.
And
100%.
I know I was the one who said it, but Wizards versus Lesbians does not endorse the use of the term Blorbo.
You're totally right, I think, and that was also you're right definitely about both sort of if you're interested in the history of how comics became what they are today, Sandman is incredibly important, and it was in the 90s, it was the comic for girls. Mm-hmm. It was the comic that was a comic shop comic, and yet girls would read it. I mean, there was ElfQuest, but you couldn't get ElfQuest in your average comic shop, and you could get Sandman in your average comic shop.
Right. Well, that's really good to know that, because that was just the impression that I got. So that's good.
No, I think that this comic was. Everybody I know who was really into this comic in high school is some flavor of queer now, even if they weren't in high school, identifying that way in high school. It was, because it was not just that it wasn't fighting, but also, and that it was talking, but there were a variety of women, some of them even unattractive, who still got to do things.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Including kill the King of Dreams.
It's true, but only the skinny blondes got to do that. But regardless,
she was looking kind of haggard back in there.
But also, but I mean, you look at the three Furies, and one of them is a hot blonde chick, and one is a pudgy middle-aged, 50-something lady, and one is a crone.
Yes. In their mythological aspects, they do get to be unattractive. It's just that the women in the waking world, except for Mad Hetty, tend to be cut from a similar type, but baby steps.
Well,
that's the thing. I mean, that's the thing that we have to.
And you do also get Hazel.
Hazel and Foxtrot both.
Yeah, like Foxglove is still pretty
Foxtrot.
Foxtrot. Right. She is, I think, still fairly conventionally attractive, but Hazel is a sort of pudgy butch lesbian.
Despair.
Despair
is a really sympathetic character to my eyes, and she actually has, I feel like, perhaps the most emotional depth out of any of the Endless. Like, she's a pretty she's not really an agent in the story, but she seems to have a lot of like emotional depth, which is interesting. And I wish she had shown up more, but there's only so much.
I always felt that about the comic. But I really think, though, talking about comics for girls, and then maybe we can move on, that I think one of the things that's made that, is why Sandman's time has passed, is that, it had just the right timing, and that it hit the scene like 2 years before manga and anime really took off.
I was thinking about that too. Like, the reason why, like, nowadays, like when I did this like year-long comics program in Florida, and like the majority of my classmates, like there were two like guys, and the rest were girls, and one non-binary person. And that, like, if you looked at, like, indie comics, quote, in, like, the 90s, that scene did not look like that at all. And and my teacher definitely, like, hypothesized, and I think, like, this is kind of a general consensus thing, is that the turning point was, like, manga, and the availability of that in like libraries and book fairs,
I mean, that certainly reflects our experience doing anime clubs during that exact period of time.
Yeah.
It was male dominated when we started and female dominated when we graduated.
And that trickled not just from the like nerdosphere proper, but into like actual creators, right? Which also is like, and that falls in line with the current crop of science fiction, It is no longer that boys' club.
Yes.
In the least.
Yes. I would argue that science fiction was less male-dominated than comics in the 90s.
It was
by the 90s.
Men were still pretending 80s. It was,
Yeah.
Yeah. But
it felt like separate lineages almost. And Sandman is definitely part of the one lineage, but it is making gestures toward the other lineage.
Yes. But, and the thing is, and not just making gestures towards, if we want to go through, a tour of teenage Isaac's problematic faves, I noticed that one of the
let me whip out my clipboard and pen here.
Now we're gonna talk about Harlan Ellison's presence.
I was about to say one of the possibly the most gushing of all of the forewords in all of the Sandman volumes.
We reread this.
We read it. Yeah.
We reread this from Season of Mists onward. We didn't bother to reread the front half of the comic because it's mostly awful. And so the first thing that I got to reread was Harlan Ellison's toe-curlingly embarrassing econominum hagiography of Sandman. Yes, Harlan Ellison, who had he not died would have been Me Too'd out of existence.
He was already kind of on
disintegrated.
Yeah. It was sort of the two things sort of happened simultaneously. The Reaper couldn't get him, but women did, much like Dream.
Right.
Well, the Reaper is a woman, so
yeah. But I don't think Harlan thought so. Regardless, so yeah, it's an interesting. It's one of those like. I would say
this is all. Why should you read?
Oh yeah, it's all why you should read it. So what I would say that it is.
I think we answered it.
We did answer, but it's like it's kind of Rocky Horror-y almost. It's like.
See, everybody says that, but I don't get it because my mom was super into Rocky Horror, so I do not understand how Rocky Horror could ever be transgressive.
Yes, fair enough. Well, I'm not going to argue whether Rocky Horror was or was not transgressive, and I'm not going to argue whether Sandman was or was not transgressive. What I am going to argue is that he was doing better for the time than most of his peers within that milieu.
Yes.
By far. And I mean,
by far. Like there are a lot of women in this comic. They talk to each
right.
other. This comic passes the Bechdel test over and over again, even though I wish it didn't. Speaking of which, I also wanted to say that it's not like there were no indie comic artists in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
CF Alison Bechdel, CF Linda Barry, blah, blah, blah. But, it's a matter of...
Also, ElfQuest.
Who was dominating the
Speaking of indie comics for girls.
Right, but it's a matter of who was dominating...
Wizards versus Lesbians?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Though,
ElfQuest is mostly just hot people making out with each other and going on adventures, I think.
And like riding wolves around.
Yeah. It's pretty meat and potatoes, I would say, is ElfQuest.
You get what you get.
This is all extremely off topic and we should get back to So why shouldn't you read Sandman?
Oh, I mean, it's unbearably cringe, a lot of it.
See, no, I refuse to accept that, though. Here's the thing. You should not avoid things just because they are cringe, and you should definitely not avoid things just because people who read it when they were a teenager and now look back at their teenage years and cringe, as we all do, are saying that it is cringe.
I don't think it's that cringe. There are certain portions that are obviously, like, there's casual racism. There's, like, a trans woman character who, I mean, we can talk about this later. Yeah, like he tries, and again, he's like
it's one of those things where like it wouldn't pass the modern sniff test, but
but it really was genuinely progressive for the time. A lot of it.
Yes.
What I was going to say before was that it passes the Bechdel test, but I kind of wish that it hadn't in a lot of circumstances, just because a lot of the women characters are toe curlingly dumb.
But to be fair, so are the men.
Yeah. I guess it's just like there's a bit of a quantum leap between like Hob Gadling and who is Foxglove's butch girlfriend, Hazel.
Yeah, but Hazel is specifically extremely dumb. Like that's just part of her deal. Is she's not very bright.
Yes, but also she's the butch lesbian, the one that we have.
It's not
the
great.
One who gets pregnant.
Yeah, the one who gets pregnant because she thinks she can't get pregnant by having sex standing up.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, it's kind of implied that she might have been raped because she was really drunk and did not intend to have sex when she invited the guy.
And in the 90s, we didn't think about it that way. But so that's one thing. It's why else shouldn't you read it? I think there are actually more reasons that you should read it than you shouldn't. I do want to double back and say it's so pretty to look at, most of it. Like
it is.
It is off the chain good. Like I would say that most of the good work that is being done in Sandman is in the ideas and it's in the art,
the aesthetic presentation.
And less so in the actual dialogue.
The dialogue is definitely one of the reasons you, by and large, shouldn't read it. The dialogue is not great. It's tons of monologues. It's tons of stuff that isn't very clever. But thinks it's really clever. And to be fair, when I was 16, I thought it was really clever.
Same
but,
there are some really good turns of phrase in there, which have stayed in my brain for, 30 years, 20 years, 25 years. However old I am.
I think it's at its best when it's, like, not trying to be deep or self-important, or I think it's at its best when it's, like, silly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the thing is that even though, like, part of the whole arc of the comic is it starts in superhero comics.
Yes.
Because it's very important. One of the things that's, like, really difficult to wrap your head around, I think, if you're coming to this fresh, is that this is a DC comic. And it takes place in the DC
stuff at
universe.
The beginning, so much weirdness at the beginning is because of that.
And it had
to be. Say? Right.
Yeah.
Well, it had, like, part of the thing that makes this so groundbreaking is that, Sandman sort of created a world where Sandman could exist. That's what the first couple really awful volumes are doing, is they're sort of pushing the boundary of what's allowed in a big comic, until eventually they can get away with, like, being the better, if still deeply flawed, comic that it is from, volume 4 on.
Yeah. But what I was saying is that one of the things that survives from the superhero mold, besides the boldening of words, which never goes away, is the is the dramatic superhero monologue.
Yeah.
Is all of these characters do them, and they're not very good.
Right, well, because the thing is that they're not even just dramatic superhero monologues. They're dramatic monologues that think they're being really deep about, like, the nature of reality and humanity. And they just don't generally pull them off. They're generally just kind of boring.
When we were discussing this, like, Kiana, I was like, I can't do this at work. I have to actually sit down and read them because it's comics. And Kiana was like, well, there's a radio play. And I was like, oh, no.
There's what? That's amazing, though.
I mean, apparently it exists, but it's like, way to take the single worst thing about the story and, make it the only thing.
Yeah, Isaac was appalled that I of all people, would suggest such a thing.
Wow. That's so much of a worse idea than a television adaptation.
Yes, it really is. You should at least be able to look at Dream. Right. Yes. Yes. And I would say another reason not to read it is, as I said before, that the comic is actually structurally misogynistic, if it tries not to be. It
really does try to. I mean, bless its heart. It's trying. It really is. It has the whole scene where Barbie goes into where the blonde, not super bright, but deeper than you think, pretty lady goes into a comic shop and everybody is super misogynist to her, and we're definitely supposed to side with her.
Yes, there's a literal goblin behind the desk at the comics shop.
Yeah, he says, we don't usually get tits as small as yours in here.
Yep, that's right.
Yep, that's right. Take that, nerds.
But as to why I say that, we'll get into that after we manage to crawl our way to the spoilers.
As to why you say it's structurally misogynistic.
Yeah,
it's a huge fucking mystery to
me. All right, so let's crawl our way to the spoilers.
Okay,
for 15 minutes
content warnings, rape,
everything.
Murder, torture, serial killers, gaslighting.
Well, a
guy
has teeth for eyes.
A guy
incest.
has teeth. No, you know what? It's
Family
really funny.
Murder.
I honest to God think that Neil Gaiman went out of his way to make sure that the comic contained every single thing that comics were accused of containing.
But it's still art, guys. Yeah.
But back when the Comics Code was enforced, because I noticed there's injury to eye was like one of the big things, right? That was supposed to be, and boy, is this comic full of horrible things happening to people's eyes.
Oh yeah, that was the classic Detective Comics motif.
Right.
So it does pay homage to its roots in a variety of different ways. Okay, but on to the spoiler zone, shall we? At long last, 20 minutes in. All right. As we arrive at the spoiler zone, Alexis asked me to point out that one of the good things about the popularity of Sandman is it drove interest in a game called Nobilis. What is the game Nobilis, you ask? Well, it's an indie tabletop RPG that features characters from mythology and embodiments of abstract concepts, if that sounds familiar. It was written by our friend Jenna Moran in 1999, and it became extremely influential in the admittedly insular world of artsy indie role-playing games. So here's my pitch, basically. When I was reading it this time and reading it like in light of Wizards versus Lesbians, my thought was, okay, so the whole point of the comic is that Dream commits suicide.
Right.
Yes.
And
but instead of suicide by cop, it's suicide by angry women.
By his exes. Suicide by ex, for the most part.
No, it's not just his exes, because
primarily his exes.
Like, Lyta isn't his ex. She's just, a weird hysterical woman who blames him unreasonably for everything that he's done.
I mean, he's also her baby daddy. By magic. So it's kind of an ex.
I mean, he's more like... no, because it specifically, he says the child was gestated in Dream. So technically, he's like her baby co-mama.
Or the womb.
Yes, he's the seahorse in this instance.
Or he's the womb that encompassed her baby while she was pregnant for years.
Women who he had weird intimate relationships of one kind or another with.
Yes.
And there's a whole lot made, particularly really actually comes up over and over again. Like the big complaint that people have about A Game of You, which is the most women-centric and most, and like almost all the characters are women in A Game of You. The big complaint that people have about it is that it features a trans woman, Wanda, who dies, of course, because he kills so many black women in this comic. He kills them horribly. I don't know why he does that, but anyway, that's beside the point. He burned two of them alive.
Right, two of them.
But regardless, what's going on with that, Neil?
I was also wondering that on the reread.
But regardless, the big complaint that people have about it is that the trans woman doesn't get to use the moon magic because she's not a quote unquote real woman. This is turf witchery.
Right.
Yeah.
And but that's only one aspect of a whole bunch of like Jungian hero with 1,000 faces gender essentialism that keeps coming up throughout the comic. Like, it's a big deal that ravens can belong to both genders. And, because that's the exception, because usually all this women's magic and men's magic is so completely separate.
Right.
And it's definitely weird that the one, the non-binary characters we have are angels, which, okay, that's fine. Like, that's actually just following, canon. But, but also Desire, who's, like, weird and creepy.
Yeah, Desire is
the
closest the comic has to a villain in some sense.
Yeah.
And here's another reason why I feel like the comic is structurally misogynist. Yet another one, if you want to. He keeps confusing desire with love. Like there are repeated instances where characters are listing the various things that the endless represent, and instead of desire, they will say love. Like Desire's bird herald are lovebirds. And like and Desire is of course this, and every infatuation that Dream experiences is like an infatuation. Dream never falls in love. He can't get outside of himself enough to fall in love. And this whole universe is sort of operating from Dream's perspective, because Dream is Gaiman's XP, because they look exactly the same. It's not, it's not subtle. This is sort of the idea of the danger of women's magic, and it's what brings him down, is like that he can't this comic doesn't actually have a place for real love to happen in it.
No, in fact, every time we only ever see women in the position of his exes, and potential romantic interest or exes. We basically never see him happy.
Or they're infatuated with him.
Or they're infatuated with him. No, or they want to kill him or whatever. But no, what I mean is that all of his relationships you only ever see before they start and after they end, or like the moment when they're ending. So Nala or Nada, I can't remember what her name is. Speaking of black women being treated horribly.
Black women being tortured for thousands of years and then immediately forgiving him when he releases her. As long as we're talking about Neil's affection for barbecuing women of color, it could be pointed out that his idea of desire is an entity with pure white skin. Of course, it's not white, it's blank. You're supposed to be able to put any race you want on that template. Of course, it's...
Yes.
And
she slapped him. That's it.
Yeah, but she
wasn't too impressed, but yeah.
She could have at least kicked him a couple times.
Kicked him in those skinny little ribs.
Right.
Get in there.
But, we see we never see any point really where they're happy, right? We see sort of the disastrous courtship and then her being banished to hell. We see Thessaly, we see them meet, and then we sort of mostly jump forward to after she's already dumped him.
Entirely jump forward.
Oh yeah,
it's all just discussed in
clear
retrospect. You don't even know who she is until
yeah.
So
and I guess you see the ending of his relationship with whichever muse it is, Calliope, I think.
Yeah, it is Calliope.
And I guess at one point you do see him flirting with Titania. I guess that's like the closest that you see to him in a vaguely positive, like one of his relationships, not after everything has already gone completely to shit.
Titania, the archetypal bitch queen.
Right.
Incidentally, like the only woman who
the only woman goth enough for
who's
him.
Right, but also like besides his sister, but who's smart enough to not let him actually fuck with her steez.
She's the only one who refuses to give a little monologue
about how
in the wake about how
awesome he was,
and like give all the deets of their relationship.
Yeah.
She kind of tells the reader to mind their own business.
Right. And so, there's a whole lot of stuff. The Furies say that women aren't about dreaming; they're about the real world.
And this is really old, like archetypal shit.
Right. It's like
the moon, the sun.
Poets and dreamers
and
and geniuses are men.
Right.
And women are the people who make sure that the practical work gets done.
Yeah, like
even
Hazel
that.
And Rose.
Yes. There's a lot of pregnant women in this.
Remember how Rose
in this
is
comic
like
also
depressed and has no purpose until she gets pregnant.
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
So
and that's after she goes to visit her grandmother, because that's what's supposed to give her back her heart is and it's not that she hooks up with the terrible guy, it's that she gets pregnant.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, it should be noted that there are almost no women in the dreaming, like the realm of
yes,
that encompasses all past
exiled basically.
Right. There's Eve,
and it's Eve, like the first woman.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's like when Nuala is there and then she leaves, Mervyn is like, God, it was nice to have her around. It's such a sausage party around here, and he's right.
And she's also when he removes her glamour, she's sort of, even though she is like infatuated with him, she's kind of like child coded. She's like dancing around.
Every woman that Dream actually enjoys interacting with is either a child or has child brain.
Besides
chaos, delirium, besides death, but his relationship with death is a thing that I'd like to get into.
Go into that
later.
Yeah. Wait, so you're saying that in this world, like, are you saying that like the male principal and the female principal are like two? They're like they can never be reconciled. And that's why true love is not possible.
They're completely segregated, but also it's just like the male world is privileged so highly here.
Yes.
But my galaxy brain take. In light of Wizards versus Lesbians, which I started talking about 10 minutes ago, but I'm going to get to now, is that the whole business of Dream dying is a metaphor for the death of the domination of men in this particular science fiction world.
I don't know, because he gets replaced by another man.
He does get replaced by another man, but it's a sensitive... Exactly. It's a man who pets his horses. Yes. It's a man who... like the old guy, the old guy locked up and tortured all of these women. This guy is like, I don't like prisons. I'm going to try to free people as much as I can. He's a sensitive man for the 90s, Alexis.
Yes, who then very promptly gets obsoleted by anime.
Well, Susanoo no Mikoto's pantheon, as you must have noticed, is acquiring many, many other realms.
And he does look pretty Bashonen in The New Dream.
Yeah, he is.
He is.
He is kind of anime, The New Dream. Yeah,
he is. But like, it's still.
He turns into a cat.
Yeah. Well, the old Dream also turned into a cat. So.
Yes. But
no, it's just. I mean, I'm willing to buy your Galaxy Brain take that this is making a case for the death of the old guard giving way to the new sensitive guy of the 90s. But I think that.
It can't be giving away to women because he can't actually imagine women as creator
right.
syndrome,
And so I think that it is, if we accept your premise, then I think it is ironic that, what ended up, sort of reshaping comics much more drastically and noticeably was the rapidly becoming female dominated anime and manga fandom that happens like a few years later.
Yeah, no, there's a reason why like nobody talks about Sandman much anymore, at least as far as I can tell.
And at least until they made a TV series.
Well, I mean, we'll see. Like they talked about Good Omens for a couple of years and they made a TV series out of that. And the reason that they talked about Good Omens is because it was gay. And one thing that Sandman isn't.
It's so heterosexual, despite the fact that there's like, lots of queer people in it. It's just extremely heterosexual. Why is the Dream King, who has like, who's supposed to be this expression of human unconscious, why is he not only male, but like has absolutely no interest whatsoever in men?
Well, I think it's because...
yes, obviously. It's because, he's the author.
This story is structurally misogynistic.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I love the phrase structurally misogynistic because it really it comes across that way in basically the entirety of the Kindly Ones and the Wake. It feels like the narrative, I don't know, it feels almost like the characters are being, puppeted, which is funny because like they're characters, but like particularly in the Wake, just like it feels like people are being non-consensually forced to spill their entire feelings, deepest feelings about Dream and their whole histories with him, and the whole thing about manipulating, rigging this Rube Goldberg machine of human emotions and women to kill you.
Yeah.
It's incredibly wizardy by our definition of wizard.
Oh, definitely.
Absolutely.
Manipulating narratives, using people's stories for one's own ends.
Yeah.
And one of the things I thought was really interesting on the reread is that you can kind of see this as this is his second and more successful attempt at suicide by X. Because there's also the thing where he lets himself be talked into going back to hell to, uncondemn his ex-girlfriend. And, it ends up, of course, being a total letdown. But he's clearly... You can watch him talk himself into this corner where he has to do this incredibly dangerous thing. No, he absolutely has to. Everyone's right. This is the thing that he needs to do.
Well, in the cosmology of this world, hell is where you go if you want to punish yourself.
Right. And so, but that he like basically, after ignoring her for 10,000 years, manufactures this reason to go somewhere where he could actually be killed. And it's, again, all about like what he owes his ex.
Yeah. And like there's this, I mean, that's the other big half of the wizard archetype that we see in Dream is the, I can't actually, it's like you go and you pursue your masculine duty and you do your masculine things. And then you realize that you can't, that there's a flaw. And then you're like, okay, well, in that case, the world is fucked and I'm going to die. Or, and in some cases I'm going to end the world with me. Although because Dream is Dream, he is in some way ending the entire dreaming along with him when he dies.
Yes.
And like the contrast here, like the avatar of like what the good masculine person does under these situations is destruction. Like he's like the how I'm actually, how you actually deal with, being responsible for nuclear war is you go off and you try to improve yourself a little bit,
Take that, Oppenheimer.
Right. You learn how to cook.
Men will literally build atom bombs instead of going to therapy.
Right.
That does seem to be but okay, so no, here's the counter argument to your thesis, your Galaxy Brain thesis about the comics, which is for something that's supposed to be a story about the old guard giving way, this is a comic and an author who is deeply mutually infatuated with the old guard.
Oh yeah.
I didn't think that you were saying this was like a conscious thing by Gaiman. I thought it was like a kind of archetypal manifestation of that story.
The author's
this is
dead,
that
so
union
it doesn't matter
and
to me.
consciousness rising up.
True.
But the author's dead, but the paratextual materials are we can still consider.
Exactly. And but the reason that this came to my mind was because precisely the paratextual materials, like who's showing up to do, like Chris Straub. Chris Straub? No, Chris Straub is a webcomic artist.
Yeah.
Who am I thinking of? Isaac didn't mean Chris Straub. He met Peter Straub, who's an American horror writer. And not Chris Straub, who's a webcomic author of such classics as Chainsaw Suit, not to be confused with Chainsaw Man. But like Ellison is the particular one. But Neil's first book was a little sort of hagiography of Douglas Adams. Another famously good at writing women science fiction author. All of the people, there are no women write these introductions, right, for any of these volumes. Right. It's all men, and it's all like, serious, dreamy creator men. Like, Sam Delaney is not a misogynist, but he's still definitely part of this, this I'm waving my hands over here. But as Kiana pointed out, the Wake, people don't hate Dream, in the Wake. Yeah. They fall over themselves to talk about how good he was.
Exactly.
Right, no, and Kiana,
even Calliope.
Right, even Calliope, who has good reason to hate him. I mean, most of these people, especially the women, have good reason to hate him. But, no, you're right that the Wake has this sort of weird artificial... It feels like they've all been given a script and are being, which is even though they're fictional characters, it has this like stiltedness to the way that they talk, which is funny because the art is like the most pretty of all of the Sandman art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's like there's a huge intentional contrast between how dark and jagged and spiky the art is in the Kindly Ones, which incidentally is probably my favorite art now. Yeah. But even when I was a kid, it was my least favorite art in the whole series, and it's now probably my favorite art. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's so good.
See, it was always this was always my favorite volume, possibly because it was the first one I read. Which certainly made reading the earlier volumes interesting because I already knew how the story was going to end. But yeah, it's always been my favorite art because it's like so weird and spiky.
Yeah, but no. It's not that he hates the old guard at all. He loves the old guard.
It's almost literally mourning.
I think that consciously or unconsciously he is sensing the coming change. I think this comic
maybe it's like almost like a apologia or justification for like someone like him.
Yeah, no.
I mean, literally someone like him.
Yeah,
I like that. I think that's good. Good job. I feel like you've made the case that makes Isaac's Galaxy Brain take really work for me.
Yeah, cool. And
came in with the assist.
Well done.
I love that you always loved this art, Alexis. So I read this. I only downloaded the files for y'all. I read this on some readcomiconline.li or whatever.
Oh, nice.
.to. And so there's a comment section which I read for some reason, and
fascinating.
This is obviously not this is so off topic, but first of all, A Game of You people were very bored by. Which I'm not sure about
I remember that being the contemporary discourse of the time.
Yeah,
that was everybody's least favorite volume at the time.
And it's interesting because Neil Gaiman always said that A Game of You was one of the most female of the volumes. And I always wondered if that was in response to the fact that everyone said it was the most boring, and if so, what the response was supposed to be pointing at.
But when the Kindly Ones started, all the comments were like, "My God, this art is so ugly." And I couldn't believe it. It suits it so well.
It does. And
what the arc is doing.
Right. I mean, I like that it's sort of everything is so stylized and extremely vividly colored and like unsubtle.
Oh, the colors are gorgeous.
I know. Yeah. I've always loved the saturated colors, and it's got this like sort of, I don't know, sort of Art Deco-y feel, very sort of modern feel to it.
Yeah, if the rest of it is Art Nouveau, then this is Art Deco.
Right, and it feels like it's sort of
such graphic shapes.
Yeah, and it feels like it's just sort of stylistically pushing back against the romanticism of the rest of the series.
That's what I feel. See, we were going to look it up, like how much, like what went into the process of choosing the artist, because it feels such a deliberate contrast. Like the rest are different artists, right? But there's kind of a house style. There's kind of
sort of a blurby, like detective. Like I remember, I had a like an anthology of old, like detective comics from the 50s, you know, which is probably the closest analog to how dark and ugly in a different kind of way the early Sandman comics are. It's like a lot of shadows, a lot of blood, a lot of greens and bruise colors, you know. And we do eventually, you know, emerge into the most deliberately pretty style that the comic ever does after Dream dies. So, but what I was going to say was, like, you know, the whole comic, like, there's a storm a-coming, you know, which is a literal storm.
Yes. Because part of the point of this entire thing is to make metaphors literal. Yes.
I think that the storm that is a-coming and that he's reacting to with his, you know, hagiography for the old, or his apologia. How do you even pronounce that?
How do you pronounce that?
We can look it up.
I'm going to say apologia. Appellation. Yeah.
Appellation.
His appellation for the olden days. I think that the storm he sees a-coming is the end of the gender binary.
It is apologia.
Yes. You know, we'll note that Desire, who is love, who he is scared of, is the villain of the piece.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And
definitely.
And is the non-binary character in the or is, as you pointed out, the non-binary character in the piece that isn't the canonically non-binary angel. And the and like so much of how this universe is constructed is about what is women's and what is men's. You know, the entire underpinning of this universe almost is what is women's and what is men's, and what role women have and what role men have. And
I actually never thought about that as how the endless fall. So men are creation and destruction.
Creation, like, destruction, life, creativity. Women are death and life. You know, giving birth.
I see. Yes.
And of
more
course,
worldly
and insanity. Don't forget
insanity and having your period, which is what despair is all about.
Oh fuck! You're right. Oh my god.
Yes.
Despair, who bleeds everywhere all the time for no reason.
But no, it's true that it's right. You know, women are death, despair, and madness, and men are creativity and destiny and
if you uncross your eyes a little bit, it's Dave Sim, it's Cerebus, you know.
And death feels like I guess we can talk about death whenever, but she has very, very little agency. It feels like she's working for someone, you know, but that someone is like
whatever God is, which is, you know, he's alluded to in this comic.
Yeah. She is a psychopomp. She's like an escort, you know, and
yeah, she's sort of a service worker in a lot of ways.
Yeah, she's performing emotional labor.
One of my favorite things in the whole comic is like how she's dressed up in like an 80s aerobics outfit when she is trying to corral all the
all the dead
come back to
Earth. That's
so cute. That's definitely one of that's a great little moment. But you're right. No, you're right that she's this sort of service worker and that she's not actually. She's not in charge of the afterlife. She's just
she's not passing judgment or anything.
She's just doing the emotional labor of, you know, she takes their hand and helps them move on.
Yeah, she doesn't threaten anyone. She doesn't fight anyone. And in fact, like in her spin-off comics, which we didn't read for this, she's kind of in peril a lot of the time. Weirdly,
that is. Did Gaiman write those?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think he
wrote.
No, he
those.
did.
Oh, okay.
He did.
There was later a spin-off manga, which I did not read.
Oh my gosh.
We're going to have to seek that one out. But actually, the first... I had forgotten this until this exact moment, but the very first Sandman adjacent thing I read was the first Death spinoff comic, which I'm pretty sure the Gamma did right, in which Death hangs out with Kurt Cobain, basically. But
yeah, I remember that. I remember really liking that one.
Oh, it was good, but still,
The point
being that, like, Death's primary role in this comic, his primary role in this comic is to provide emotional support for the people, for Dream, and for the people who she collects.
Yes.
She never does anything for the plot, Yeah. She does the business of collecting him at the end, and she's like upset about it, but she's like, well, it's part of the job.
Yeah, it seems like she really has no.
She doesn't get. She has no, like. She basically sees the worst things happening all the time and has like essentially infinite emotional capacity.
Yeah, it's kind of like it is his fantasy woman, obviously.
Right.
She is based on an
all his
actual
trauma
person.
And keep on ticking. Yeah.
Her design is like is based on this specific woman.
Tori Amos.
No, not Tori Amos.
Tori Amos is Delirium, I thought.
Well, no, actually, the comic predates Neil Gaiman's friendship with Tori Amos. Tori Amos was a Sandman fan, and she wrote a Sandman reference into one of her songs about her breakup with Trent Reznor, and
I didn't edit out this next part. I guess I thought that it would be fun.
Where she sings
expanded universe.
Right? And then she sings, if you need me and Neil will be hanging out with the Dream King. And she gave the CD to Neil Gaiman, who was like, oh, I like this. And then they became friends. And then he wrote her into Stardust. And then she also worked a reference to being in Stardust, her cameo in Stardust, into another song.
Come on. Trent Reznor's obviously Dream in this, this angry goth
I assume that that's part of the. I assume that was part of the point of the song.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's there. So the character did predate his friendship with Tori Amos, I believe. Though I don't actually know. I don't actually remember when Delirium really shows up. So maybe
I'm tempted to cut this whole digression out.
The Tori Amos thing?
The Tori Amos digression. I think that it was my fault for bringing it up. What were you talking about? The Death is based on a real person.
Yes, Death is based on a real person. Her design is like an actual goth woman who I believe is no longer alive.
Yeah, and of course taking somebody's likeness and story and putting it into your comic as a symbol of something that you need.
Yes.
Is prime wizard behavior.
It is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my contention despite how groundbreaking the comic is and how utterly beautiful it is in a lot of ways. It's it really doesn't like women.
And groundbreaking in terms of even though it's groundbreaking in terms of being being comics that were coming out of it being a DC comic that was aimed as much at women as at men. If not more so. Yeah.
Well, you can't go right from, not acknowledging that women are anything, but, you know how it goes. No, you can't go from mainstream superheroes to Adventure Time to Steven Universe all in one go. Right.
This was this provided part of the bridge. Got enough women into comic shops and into comics that I think it probably also did help pave the way for some of the interest in manga as well, and like other comics by and about women.
Nobody's going to be going into comics shops to buy those manga if they haven't, if they're being kept out by the Gorgons for talking about their titties.
Right.
Sorry, not Gorgons. That's a different archetype.
Goblins. We meet the Gorgons.
We do. I kind of like them.
But it is, it's true that the Endless, Delirium, who I think was many people's favorite character.
Full disclosure, I basically stole Delirium and wrote her into the novel that I wrote when I was in my first year of college, which was awful. Right down to the heterochromia.
But Many of my friends in high school, she was also their favorite character.
Sure.
And
Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
She's broad appeal.
Yeah.
Right. And part of it's that, like, she's capable of being funny.
Yes, to the extent that any jokes in this comic are funny.
Right.
I think she's funny.
She's pretty funny. Yeah.
I
mean, the funniest part in the entire comic, to my sense of humor, is when Matthew the Raven is screaming at her for driving on the wrong side of the road because I have the sense of humor of a 12-year-old.
For me, the funniest part of the comic happens like a page before when she realizes that this means that, the horrible death of yet another black woman means that she gets to drive.
Yeah, the expressions. Beautiful.
But I mean, she's a female character in this comic who's allowed to be both silly and also have like some genuine pathos. And that's an emotional range that, a lot of the women, really a lot of the people in the comic don't get. Oh,
and she gets to dress down Destiny, which nobody else ever gets to do.
Right. She gets to dress down basically everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gaiman clearly has a
thing
spot,
for. Well, that's the. I mean, he you were pointing it out. It's like Dream loves hanging out with chaos. He loves hanging out with children, basically, mad old women and children.
Yeah, well, and childlike women.
And childlike women.
Yeah.
Like that's why he doesn't. That's why he's so kind to Nuala, for example. When he bothers to notice
who gets vastly more childish when she loses her glamour.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And because he made her do that. He said, I don't allow glamours here.
Right. You don't get to pretend to be a grown-up.
Right. It's almost like like you were saying, the feminine principle as like a fully realized, like sexually mature woman cannot exist in the dreaming. And like maybe Nada, and whoever else he's invited over the years, stay and be my dream queen, maybe they sensed that was like impossible.
Right.
Aesthetically, structurally,
which is why they all burn out within like a few months.
Yeah,
and,
Thessaly,
because nobody can be the dream queen.
Yes, Thessaly's
I appreciated Thessaly's description of how their relationship went.
It's fascinating. Yeah, she described herself like as the moon reflects the sun's light. She felt that she was only reflecting the love, quote, the infatuation and obsession.
And it's
he was
like
pouring onto her.
You can read that as like, women are, don't emit light of their own. But of course, from Thessaly, like that's, I do, or I could.
Because Thessaly is the original TERF. Thessaly is the one who's... Thessaly is the sort of person who would spell...
absolutely.
Thessaly is the sort of person who would spell woman with an extra B.
Yes, and a Y, yep. Yep.
If you're wondering, like I was, where the B in woman could possibly go, goes right after the M to make woman. Not at the front to make woman or woman. Turf shit. Oh God. We're almost an hour in, even with edits.
Even with cutting out the entire digression about Tori Amos and about downloading comics.
Yes, I'm going to leave in your mention of the digression about Tori Amos, though.
Excellent.
I just want to go through my notes and say some little things about the comic that I enjoyed, and of course, feel free to join in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I had something that I wanted to say while you're going through your notes. So to get back to the sort of Wizards versus Lesbians theme, on the one hand, this is really sympathetic to Dream because it's his story and it's very much from his point of view. But I think in some ways it really does lay a lot of the conceptual groundwork that we end up getting 20 years later for these, in all of our Wizards versus Lesbians comics, because, and I mean, I remember reading this back in the 90s, the fact that a bunch of angry women could murder the Dream King, and everyone was like, well, this is sad, but perhaps this is for the best. Like, at the time, that felt very, like, I'm not going to say empowering, but like it felt very transformative. And I think that even just having that narrative out there, and maybe this is, in our collective unconsciousness, was helpful in starting to create stories where it's obvious from the beginning that not only, is it maybe for the best that the manipulative, shallow, self-obsessed man gets destroyed, but that that the act of destroying him isn't about him setting up this elaborate trap, but is in fact about women who never were sexually interested in him in the first place coming into their own. That feels like a natural evolution from this story. And I think that even, whether or not everybody who writes I doubt that, everyone who writes a Wizards versus Lesbians novel, especially these days, has read The Sandman. But I do think that did sort of lay ground for a narrative archetype that, we're now really seeing come into its own.
I can definitely see that.
I agree. I mean, I will also, the author is dead and all, but I will also point out that Neil Gaiman was a collaborator with Terry Pratchett, and Terry was already doing all that stuff.
Yes. Well, I feel like part of the point of growing up as a wannabe edgy teen in the 90s is coming to the realization that Terry Pratchett was actually a better writer than Neil Gaiman.
Yeah. And like Alexis pointed out earlier, the genre books and comics are still pretty far removed.
Definitely. So I've whittled down all of the things in my notes that I think are actually worth mentioning. I want to point out that you shouldn't give dogs chocolate.
No, you should not give dogs chocolate. Destruction was doing that.
Keeps giving. Yes, it's destruction. Don't do that.
Right.
I want to know who the little Chinese boy is.
Let's not get into Neil Gaiman's treatment of Asia. Let's just not.
Oh, you mean the little Hong Kong boy who's having samurai dreams for some reason?
Right.
Yes. But
didn't Nada get reincarnated?
Nada also gets reincarnated as a little boy in Hong Kong who's having for some reason samurai dreams instead of.
Right, but he's not. But he shouldn't be wearing like that outfit. That's back in time. Oh,
I see what you're saying.
Nada was born in a hospital.
The one where death. I mean, because. We see 3 little Chinese boys.
Why are there so many little Chinese boys? What? Please don't clip that. What do they mean?
I mean, so there's Nada being reincarnated. There's the little boy in Hong Kong who I don't think is supposed to be Nada because the ages don't match up. Who's having samurai dreams?
Just a rando one having samurai dreams. Yeah.
Because Nada's only like 3 years old at this point.
Too young for samurai.
And there's also the definitely happening in the past. There's also the definitely happening in the past thing where Death is spending her one day, because Death spends one day out of every century being mortal, and she's like, and she apparently spends that continuing to provide emotional labor to men or to boys.
That's true.
And they're just like, she's just sitting. I don't know. The timing doesn't really work out for it to be anybody really obvious. And also, really, let's just not get into Neil Gaiman's treatment of Asia.
Fair enough.
And Asian mythology.
I had forgotten about his origin, and I was like, is that Mao? But anyway.
No.
I've shocked Alexis into silence. Now I know it's not. Oh God! Speaking of Asia, the My Lai Me Lai joke, which doesn't even work for the stripper name, and anyway.
Oh wait, what did you think? You said I was rereading it last month before this, and you said the Ishtar dance scene was, you said it was very affecting when you were.
It was younger. It was very affecting when I was younger because I didn't know what those songs were. And
you didn't know the songs?
Yeah, and having I imagined Under Pressure being a much different song.
Much sexier.
Than it turned out to be. Iggy Pop's Calling Sister Midnight does actually work. I will give him that.
That's the song that she actually self-immolates
to.
Right.
But the fact that, it's like the warning of imminent death comes with Under Pressure. And when I actually listened to Under Pressure, I had like one of those mental orange juice and toothpaste, like, sort of moment.
Yeah. Third woman burned alive. She's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, she explodes, but yes, yeah, no, it does keep happening. He likes burning witches, which is it comes with the territory.
I do like what happens with Tiffany there. It's because it's funny.
It's very funny.
It is very funny.
That's a moment of genuine humor in the comic.
The angel came to me and gave me an Armani jacket. Yes,
and told me I was saved. And then she she becomes a born again Christian on the talk circuit.
Yeah, no, he loves making jokes about how stupid Southern American Christians are.
I think it's more about making jokes about how stupid American megachurch fundamentalist Christianity was. And I gotta say, growing up as a teen in the South, that was definitely one of the appeals of the comic for me and for all of my friends.
I'm not saying he was wrong.
As you know. At the alternative school in the South.
Yeah. Let's see. And the last thing that I want to say is that I'm very happy that by the final volume of the book, they finally managed to draw a raven.
Yes.
Nobody knew how to draw a raven.
Some Vulture-esque beaks.
It's particularly
Matthew.
It's particularly egregious in Season of Mists, where he looks absolutely fucking nothing like a raven.
He does. No, Kiana's right. He looks like a vulture.
Yeah. At least he's like properly stylistic in the kindly ones, and so you can that's fine.
You can project your idea of a raven.
Finally, he looks like a raven.
See, that's another, and that is
he
another
has the
reason.
raven neck scruff in the wake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I always assumed that the wake was the art that now they have the budget to just blow on the prettiest possible art for the final volume.
Well, they're going to pay a guy to pencil and ink his own art.
Was it the same guy?
Yeah, in contravention of all comics.
That must have taken forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of all comics convention. But anyway.
Comics convention?
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Where?
Let's all go to Kumori-con. So yes, that's Sandman.
That's Sandman. It certainly was. It certainly was a thing.
Yeah, I do have one final note on the sort of transformative narrative bit. Like, the difference between the old Sandman and the kinder, gentler Sandman is the whole foreshadowing of the scene with the blood on the throne and the Corinthian there, which I suspect is because Neil changed his mind, but he actually does a pretty good job of making it symbolic in the comic of how, like, in the old Sandman, the Corinthian absolutely would have shish kebabbed Matthew to the throne. That's exactly the kind of thing that Neil would have liked to do, and it would have been a stupid, edgy decision. And in the new one, because we have our kinder, gentler, sensitive 90s man, a random monster gets killed, which isn't actually any good, and the scene makes no sense. We don't even know why the Corinthian is back at all. But at least Matthew gets to live.
Right.
Half measures.
Yes.
Anyway.
I assumed that the Corinthian is back because Neil just couldn't let go of him because, he's
very cool.
I guess. The problem is that it's hard to take the Corinthian seriously when, like, the first time you really see him, he's running a serial killers convention.
It's pretty dorky.
He's just real dorky.
Yes,
okay,
fine.
Here's actually one other thing I want to say about the Sandman that I realized, and it's more sort of, it's a thing about the Sandman and American Gods both, which is, there's a thing, and also Neverwhere, there's a thing that's sort of in Neil Gaiman's writing where he's trying to convince you that not only is, like, that there's this whole world and reality beyond reality, and that, it's definitely coexisting, and the people you could pass are gods, could be gods, and that, but this isn't marvelous, because also any random person you meet, whether it's like a waitress or, the or like the guy at the park, is actually keeping horrible secrets and terrible things that they've done inside. And like, this seemed really deep in the 90s when, you know, I was 16 and stupid. But actually, most people just are not actually containing like deep, dark secrets. Most people aren't secretly necrophiliacs and kitten stranglers and rapists. Most people are just kind of people.
Well, once again, it's half measures. It's like, it's the right thought is that everybody is actually interesting and has an interesting story.
Right.
The problem is that
he seems incapable of understanding that you can have a story that's interesting that doesn't involve like gruesome
kitten
murder.
Stranglers, yes.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of American Gods just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And you can see the seeds of it in Sandman.
We
sure.
We eventually decided that Neil Gaiman was not a very good writer, and I think that was the correct decision. It took more or less time to get there. Coraline is probably the best thing he ever wrote.
I agree.
All right.
Coraline is good.
Coraline is good. I agree.
Signing off.
And on that cheerful note, this is a bonus episode, so we will not announce what we're doing next because who knows when this will get slotted in. But thank you all for listening, and thank you so much, Kiana, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you will continue to join us for all future comics related episodes.
Definitely.
And I'm sorry, I've once again forgotten your Tumblr URL, but
junkworldusa.tumblr.com.
If for some reason you're aware of our podcast and not aware of Kiana's comics, please definitely go check out Kiana's comics because they're genuinely quite good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I had a lot of fun.
Good.
Awesome.
And I, for my part, am glad that I got through that whole thing without mentioning that the way that the Endless encompass the opposites of their aspects is very much a Homestuck aspect inversion thing. If you don't know what aspect inversion theory is, please don't ask.
Well, I assume you're not editing that out, so...
Just for the look on Kiana's face.
We have once again reset the Homestuck counter on this podcast. Thank you, everybody, and bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.